Hey, friends. We're working our butts off to bring you this content, just for your entertainment. If you like what you see, here's a deal: instead of offering us tea, just hit that subscribe button. It's way easier, totally free, and honestly makes us just as happy. Let's start the new story for you. I grew up learning, in 1,000 small unspoken ways, what us boy was supposed to be. Not in the loud, cartoonish sense of rules written on a wall, but in the steady drip of expectations that came from everywhere, the way my father's shoulders stiffened when I cried, the way my mother praised my sister for being pretty while praising me for being tough, the way teachers separated lines for games and chores, the way relatives chuckled if I showed too much interest in anything soft, delicate, or decorative. I don't think anyone meant harm. They were passing along a language they'd inherited. But when you're a kid, you don't recognize it as language. You recognize it as weather. It's just how the world is. And yet, even when I was young, there were moments when that weather shifted and I felt something warm move through me, a curiosity that didn't fit the forecasts. I remember being maybe 7 or 8 and finding a scarf in a coat closet. It was light and smooth, patterned in muted colors, and when I wrapped it around my neck I felt a strange kind of calm. Not excitement like I'd stolen something, not fear like I'd done something wrong, more like the quiet relief of finally hearing a note that matches the one you've been humming in your head without knowing it. I looked at myself in the hallway mirror, the scarf draped just so, and I didn't see a joke. I saw possibility. Then I heard footsteps and yanked it off like it was hot. Those early moments didn't come with a label. They weren't even consistent. I still loved the things people expected me to love: bikes, baseball cards, late summer evenings that smelled like cut grass. But alongside those, there were these private flickers of interest: fabric, color, the way certain clothes moved. Not in any explicit way, not in a way I could have explained. It was more like the sensation of stepping into a different posture, a different energy, and realizing it didn't make me disappear. It made me feel present. As I got older, the world's expectations didn't just continue, they sharpened. Middle school turned everything into a tribunal. Boys learned quickly what would get you mocked, and we policed each other as much as any adult did. I learned to keep my voice steady, to laugh at the right jokes, to pretend I wasn't paying attention when someone called another boy girly like it was the worst thing you could be. I became good at reading rooms, good at adjusting myself to fit them. When you do that long enough, you start to confuse the mask with the face. At home, I was the dependable one. I did what I was told. I didn't cause trouble. And because I didn't cause trouble, no one looked too closely. The truth is, I didn't look too closely either. I had an internal rule: anything that might complicate my life went into a locked drawer in my mind. It wasn't that I felt constant shame. It was more that I felt a constant need to be normal. Normal was safety. Normal was belonging. Normal was not getting called out in the hallway or at Thanksgiving dinner. Still, the drawer didn't stay empty. In my early teens, when my sister and her friends left clothes around after sleepovers, I would sometimes linger near the laundry basket and feel my chest tighten with a mixture of curiosity and dread. Once, when no one was home, I held up a skirt, not against my body, not wearing it, just holding it. I remember the weight of it, how it hung, how it seemed designed for a kind of movement and expression that boys weren't allowed. I put it back carefully, like I was handling something sacred and forbidden at the same time. Then I spent the rest of the day in a low-grade panic that someone would somehow know. What I didn't have then, what I wish I'd had, was a framework that wasn't built from extremes. The only stories I encountered were either cruel jokes or sensational headlines, like identity was always a spectacle or a scandal. There was no ordinary narrative about quiet exploration, about a person who could be responsible and kind and still have an inner life that didn't line up neatly with social categories. Without that, I treated my curiosity like a defect to be managed rather than a part of me to be understood. By the time I went to college, I'd built a personality around being stable. I was the guy who could be counted on, the friend who helped you move apartments, the student who met deadlines. College offered more freedom, and for a while I thought the drawer might finally open on its own. But freedom can also mean you're responsible for your own truths, and I wasn't ready for that. I dated a little, not much. I was shy, and I tended to choose people who felt safe, kind, grounded, not likely to ask probing questions about my interior world. I told myself I was just private. I told myself everyone had odd corners they didn't talk about. I told myself it didn't matter. The first time I actually wore feminine clothing, I was alone, and it was accidental in the sense that I didn't plan it as a milestone. A friend's girlfriend had left a cardigan at our place after a party. It was late. My roommate was asleep. I picked it up to fold it and felt the softness. Before I could talk myself out of it, I slipped it on. It was too small in the shoulders, but it draped differently than anything I owned. I looked at myself in the mirror and my face did something I hadn't seen it do in a long time. It softened. My expression wasn't about looking like anything. It was about feeling something, a sense of permission, however temporary. Then the permission vanished and panic rushed in. I took it off fast, folded it, put it back, and sat on my bed with my heart pounding as if I'd narrowly avoided being caught committing a crime. That was the pattern back then, a brief moment of calm followed by a wave of fear. The fear wasn't about what I'd done. It was about what it might mean. Meaning felt dangerous. I carried that pattern into adulthood the way some people carry old injuries. They don't always hurt, but you move around them without thinking. I graduated, got a job, learned to do the small rituals of professional life, meetings, deadlines, polite laughter. I made friends. I paid bills. I became an adult in all the obvious ways. And tucked under that adult life was the same locked drawer, now reinforced by a bigger stake. If I opened it, it might change everything I'd built. I met my wife, Clare, at a time when I wasn't looking for a grand reinvention. I was looking for steadiness. We worked in adjacent departments at the same company. She was sharp and warm, with a kind of grounded humor that made people relax around her. She listened in a way that wasn't passive. She seemed to actually track what you said, to remember it later. When she asked how my weekend was, she didn't just want a polite answer. She wanted the truth of it. Being seen like that was both comforting and unsettling. Our relationship grew slowly, not because we lacked chemistry, but because we both had busy lives, and because we were cautious in a way that felt mature. Looking back, I can see I was also cautious because I didn't want to be known too deeply. It's strange to admit that about someone I loved. I loved her, deeply. But I also maintained a controlled version of myself, the one I believed would be easiest to love. We married in our early 30s. By then, the drawer had become less about fear of being mocked and more about fear of disappointing someone whose opinion mattered. It's one thing to worry about strangers. It's another to imagine the person you share a bed with looking at you differently. I told myself it wasn't her responsibility to hold that part of my life. I told myself keeping it private was a form of protection, for her, for me, for the marriage. It sounded noble in my head. It was also avoidance. The first crack in that logic didn't come from a dramatic confession or an argument. It came from exhaustion. We were a few years into marriage, settled into routines, weekend grocery runs, shared streaming shows, quiet mornings with coffee. From the outside, we looked like we had it figured out. Inside, I was getting tired of managing my own mind. There's a cost to keeping a drawer locked. You spend energy leaning on it so it doesn't open. Claire noticed. She wasn't the type to accuse, she asked questions that made room for answers. One night, after we'd cleaned up dinner, she stood at the sink drying a plate and said, gently, "You've seemed tense lately." Not with me, just in general. Are you holding something back? I could have said work stress. I could have said sleep. I did say something like that, at first. But my voice sounded thin even to me. She turned and looked at me, not confrontational, just steady. And I felt the old fear, the fear of meaning. If I spoke, it might become real. I don't know how to talk about it, I said, and even that was a step toward honesty. Try, she said. I'm here. The drawer didn't burst open. It creaked. I told her, in a careful, sanitized way, that sometimes I felt drawn to feminine clothing, that it had been there for a long time, that I didn't fully understand it. I emphasized what I thought she needed to hear, that I loved her, that it wasn't about replacing her, that it wasn't about anything explicit. I tried to make it small, manageable, like a quirk. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, I stared at the floor, waiting for the shift, the subtle recoil, the disappointment, the confusion. Instead she said, "Thank you for telling me." That must have been heavy to carry. I didn't cry, but something in my chest loosened like a knot untied. Relief came first. Then fear came right behind it. Relief could be temporary. This could still go wrong. For the next few weeks, we approached the topic like we were walking around a fragile object. We didn't bring it up casually. We didn't joke about it. I was grateful, but also uneasy. Part of me wanted her to forget it. Part of me wanted her to ask more. The tension lived in that contradiction. One Saturday afternoon, we were reorganizing the bedroom closet. It was the kind of mundane project couples do when they want their lives to feel orderly. Claire pulled out an old shoebox of mine and asked, "Can I toss this?" It was filled with miscellaneous things, a worn belt, some receipts, a couple of photos. Nothing incriminating. But my stomach clenched anyway, a reflex from years of hiding. She noticed. She held the box and said, "Hey. It's okay. I'm not trying to catch you in anything." "I know," I said, and I meant it. She set the box down and leaned against the dresser, studying me. There was a softness in her face, but also something else, curiosity, maybe, or a careful kind of intention. "Can I ask you something?" she said.
"Yeah."
She hesitated, then smiled in a small, almost shy way that I didn't recognize at first. "Would you ever want to try it? Like, actually try wearing something? Not as a secret. Just, here. With me." The room went very quiet. I could hear the faint hum of the ceiling fan. My mouth went dry. The invitation landed in me like two opposing forces, excitement and alarm. Excitement because the thing I'd locked away was being offered daylight. Alarm because daylight meant consequences. "I don't know," I said, which was honest in the way people say, "I'm afraid." She nodded slowly. "We don't have to. I'm not pushing. I just thought, maybe it would help you not feel alone with it." My mind raced through scenarios. What if I tried and felt ridiculous? What if I tried and felt too good, like opening a door I couldn't close? What if it changed how she saw me? What if it changed how I saw myself? I looked at her and saw that she wasn't teasing. Her eyes were steady. There was also, beneath the steadiness, a faint excitement of her own, like she was curious about this hidden part of me, not in a predatory way, but in the way you're curious about a room in a house you've lived in for years and never opened. That realization complicated things. It meant this wasn't just about me. I tried to speak like a responsible adult. If I do, I don't want it to become. I don't want it to become a thing that takes over. I don't want to hurt us. She walked closer. Then we set boundaries. We talk. We go slow. Go slow. The phrase should have calmed me. It did, a little. But it also carried a subtle implication. There would be steps, a progression. A path. Paths lead places. "I'm scared," I admitted. "I know," she said. "I'm a little scared too. But I'm mostly. I don't know. I'm mostly glad you told me." We stood there in the half-finished closet mess, like two people negotiating with the future. The first time, when it finally happened, it wasn't dramatic. Claire didn't march in with a suitcase of clothes. She went to her side of the closet and pulled out a simple sweater, soft and neutral, and a pair of lounge pants that were clearly feminine in cut but not flashy. She held them up like an offering, not a command. "Only if you want," she said. "And only if it feels safe." My hands were trembling a little. I hated that my body gave me away. I took the clothes and went into the bathroom to change. Locking the door felt like an old habit. I stared at the fabric in my hands and felt like I was holding two versions of my life. When I pulled the sweater on, it slid over my skin with a softness that made my throat tighten. The pants fit better than I expected. I looked in the mirror and didn't see a caricature. I saw myself, but with a different outline. My shoulders looked less rigid. My posture changed without me deciding to change it. I felt exposed and strangely calm. Then I opened the bathroom door and walked out. Claire looked up from the bed where she'd been sitting, giving me space. Her eyes widened, not in shock, but in recognition. She stood, slowly, as if she didn't want to spook an animal. She walked closer, stopped a respectful distance away, and said, "How do you feel?" I tried to answer, but my voice cracked. "I feel like I'm going to cry." She nodded. "You can." I didn't fully. But tears blurred my vision. The surprising thing wasn't the clothing. It was the relief of not being alone while wearing it. The secret had always amplified the fear. Sharing it diluted the fear, even if it didn't erase it. Claire reached out and lightly touched my sleeve, feeling the fabric. "It suits you," she said, and the compliment landed with a complicated weight. It made me feel seen, but also made me wonder what exactly she was seeing. That evening, we talked more than we had in months. We talked about how I'd felt as a kid, about the shame I'd absorbed without choosing it, about how masculinity had sometimes felt like a performance I was terrified of failing. Claire didn't try to diagnose me. She didn't rush to labels. She asked questions. When did I first notice it? What did it feel like emotionally? Was it about comfort? About identity? About expression? About relief? The questions weren't interrogations, they were invitations to know myself. In the days that followed, I expected the novelty to fade and the topic to retreat. Instead, it returned quietly, in small ways. Claire would be folding laundry and pause, holding one of her tops, and look at me with a slight tilt of her head, like she was considering a thought. "Do you want to try this one?" she'd ask casually, as if offering a sip of her drink. Sometimes I said no. Sometimes I said, maybe later. And sometimes, to my own surprise, I said yes. Here is where the shift began, subtle enough that I didn't recognize it at first. Because each time she offered, she was also guiding. She chose which items. She set the tone, calm, domestic, safe. She framed it as something we did together, not something I did alone. And because I was grateful, because gratitude can make you pliable, I let her. At first, that felt like relief. I didn't have to make decisions. I didn't have to confront the full meaning. Claire was, in a sense, holding the edges of the experience so it didn't overwhelm us. But there was also another edge to it, one I didn't name right away: control. Control isn't always a villain. Sometimes it's structure. Sometimes it's care. But when you've spent your whole life controlling a part of yourself, handing that control to someone else can feel both freeing and dangerous. One night, about a month in, Claire suggested we go a step further. We were sitting on the couch, and she said, "Can I do something?" She had a gentle, almost playful tone, like she was asking to braid my hair. But my hair was short. There was no braiding. "What?" I asked. She got up and came back with a small kit, nothing fancy, just a brush, maybe a little moisturizer, a lip balm. "I want to take care of you," she said. "Not because you need fixing. Just because I want to. Is that okay?" My chest tightened again, that familiar cocktail of excitement and fear. I nodded. She sat close and began slowly, narrating what she was doing as if to keep me grounded. "I'm just going to brush your hair back a bit. Then maybe some moisturizer. If anything feels weird, say so." Her voice was calm, and that calmness made me trust her. As she worked, I felt something else rise: vulnerability. The kind that isn't about being weak, but about being in someone's hands. I realized that part of my inner conflict wasn't just about clothing. It was about permission to be cared for in a way I'd always associated with femininity. I had spent years equating care with dependency and dependency with failure. Now, sitting there while my wife gently applied moisturizer to my face, I felt my old definitions wobble. "Do you like this?" she asked. "I do," I said, and my voice sounded smaller than usual. She smiled. "You don't have to sound sorry for it." That sentence stayed with me. I hadn't realized I was apologizing with my tone. I apologized with my posture, with my carefulness, with my constant readiness to retreat. After that, the dynamic between us began to evolve. Not overnight. Not in a way you could point to and say, "Here, this is the moment things changed." It was more like a tide. Claire started taking initiative in little ways, suggesting what I might wear at home on certain evenings, setting out clothes on the bed before I'd asked, asking me to shave more closely because it helps the look feel smoother, telling me what colors suited me. Again, none of it was cruel. If anything, it was tender. But it also came with an undercurrent. She liked directing. She liked being the one who knew. And I, who had been so lost in my own uncertainty, found comfort in her certainty. The conflict in me wasn't about whether I enjoyed it. I did. The conflict was about what it meant that I enjoyed it, and what it meant that she enjoyed steering it. There were moments when I resisted, not dramatically, but with small hesitations. "I don't know if I want to do that," I'd say. "Maybe that's too much." Claire would pause, study me, and then choose her words carefully. "Okay," she'd say, but then she'd add, "What part feels too much? The clothing? Or being seen? Or letting yourself want it?" Sometimes her questions made me feel exposed, like she was reading me better than I could read myself. That could feel intimate, and it could feel unsettling. I started to notice that when she asked those questions, she wasn't just trying to help me. She was also shaping the narrative. "This is about you letting yourself want it." That framing positioned her as the guide and me as the one who needed coaxing. And yet, maybe I did need coaxing. Maybe I had been locked in avoidance for so long that I couldn't tell the difference between healthy boundaries and fear-based retreat. We talked about it, because Claire insisted we should. She had a strong moral sense about honesty, about consent, about not making a marriage into a silent battleground. One evening at the kitchen table, she said, "I don't want to accidentally push you into something you'll regret. And I don't want you to say yes, just because you think it makes me happy." I stared at my hands. I don't even know what I want half the time. She reached across the table, palm up. I put my hand in hers. "Then we learn," she said. "Together." That was the best of us. Not perfect. But trying. The hardest part, as the months went on, was not what happened inside our home. It was the echo of the outside world inside my head. Even if Claire accepted me, even if I accepted myself in small increments, I still lived in a society that had trained me to associate femininity in men with ridicule or danger. I found myself scanning the windows at night to make sure the curtains were closed. I kept the clothes tucked away. I worried about a neighbor seeing a package delivered. I worried about family visits. Claire noticed the hypervigilance. "You're bracing all the time," she said once. "I don't want us to pay for this," I said. "We're not doing anything wrong," she replied, but her voice carried a weight I didn't like. Because she knew, as I did, that a wrong and punished aren't the same thing. You can be harmless and still be targeted. You can be honest and still be misunderstood. That awareness forced me into a more mature form of responsibility. It wasn't enough to say, "I'm exploring my identity, therefore everything should be easy." Real life doesn't work like that. Responsibility meant thinking about safety, about our social context, about the fact that Claire was also taking a risk by standing with me. It meant acknowledging that if this became public, she might be judged too. It meant not making my self-discovery an excuse to ignore consequences. So we set rules. Not rules like a prison. Rules like a map. We agreed that anything we did would stay at home unless we both explicitly decided otherwise. We agreed that we'd keep communication open. We agreed that if either of us felt overwhelmed, we would pause, not push through just to prove something. That map helped. It also revealed something else. As Claire took more initiative, I sometimes felt like I was handing her the steering wheel not just for the clothes, but for my self-understanding. And that could be risky. If she became the interpreter of my identity, then my identity might become dependent on her preferences. I realized this one night when she laid out an outfit that felt more feminine than what we'd done before. A softer top, a skirt, leggings. Still modest, still safe, but a step forward in presentation. My heart raced. "I don't know," I said, standing at the edge of the bed. Claire's expression was gentle, but there was a firmness in her voice. "You said you wanted to keep exploring. You said you didn't want fear to make decisions for you." "I did," I said, and I hated that she was right. She sat down and patted the bed beside her. "Come here," she said. I sat. She took my hand. "Look at me," she said, and I did. "You can say no. Always. But I want you to know something. I'm not asking because I want to embarrass you. I'm asking because I think you're stronger than the shame you grew up with." That line pierced me because it framed the choice as courage versus shame. It made saying no feel like surrender. And I could feel the ethical tension in that. Was she motivating me? Or subtly pressuring me? The difference can be thin. I swallowed. "I need to be sure I'm doing it for me." "Then take a minute," she said. "Close your eyes. Notice what your body is saying." So I did. I closed my eyes. I breathed. My body was saying, afraid, yes. But also, wanting. Not wanting in a frantic way. Wanting in a steady, quiet way, like thirst. I opened my eyes. "Okay," I said. Claire's face softened with relief, and something else, satisfaction, maybe, not malicious, but real. She got up and guided me toward the bathroom, not touching me much, letting me move at my own pace. I changed. I looked at myself in the mirror. The skirt changed the whole silhouette. It made me feel exposed and honest. It also made me feel like I was crossing a line that could never be fully uncrossed. When I came out, Claire looked at me and didn't laugh. She didn't gush. She simply said, "There you are," as if she'd been waiting for me to arrive. That sentence hit me harder than any compliment could have. Because it implied a truth, that this was me, not a costume. And it raised a question I had avoided for years: what is it me? Is me the stable man in a button-down at work? Is me the person in soft clothes at home? Is me a blend? Is me something that shifts depending on context? The longer this went on, the more I understood that identity isn't always a single declaration. Sometimes it's a series of honest observations over time. I didn't suddenly decide I was a different person. I noticed that parts of me had been starved, and feeding them made me more whole. At the same time, I had to confront how easily I could outsource my agency. There were evenings when Claire would say, "I think tonight you should wear this," and I'd feel a flicker of resistance, not because I didn't like it, but because I didn't like the feeling of being directed. That resistance was important. It was my self-respect speaking, my need to remain an equal partner rather than a project. So I began practicing something that was surprisingly hard, making my own choices. I started saying, "I want to pick tonight." Or, "I want to try something simpler." At first, Claire would look slightly disappointed. That disappointment triggered my old people-pleasing instinct, and I'd almost back down. But I didn't. I held my ground gently, without accusation. We talked about it. Claire admitted, in her careful, honest way, "I think I got excited." Not in a weird way. I don't know. In a way that felt like we found a new layer of trust. And I liked being the one who helped you open it. "And I'm grateful," I told her. "But I don't want to feel like I'm only allowed to explore if you're leading." She nodded slowly. "That's fair." It was a turning point, not because it solved everything, but because it reminded us that exploration should deepen equality, not replace it. That was one of the biggest lessons of my life: self-discovery doesn't excuse you from relational ethics. If anything, it demands more of them. It demands clarity, patience, accountability. As time passed, I noticed changes in my mental health that surprised me. I had always carried a low-level irritability, like a constant friction inside me. When I began allowing myself to express softness at home, that friction eased. I slept better on nights when I didn't feel like I was hiding. I laughed more easily. I was more patient. It wasn't magical. I still had stress. I still had hard days. But I felt less split. I also began to see how much of my earlier shame had been borrowed. Shame is often social debt. You inherit it without consenting to the loan. When I examined it, I realized I had been ashamed not because I was doing something harmful, but because I had learned that certain kinds of expression were unacceptable for someone like me. That realization didn't erase the shame instantly, but it gave me a way to talk back to it. There were still consequences, though, even within the safety of our home. I had moments of grief for the years I'd spent bracing. I had moments of anger at myself for not being braver sooner, then had to practice compassion because anger doesn't heal. Claire had moments of uncertainty too. She would sometimes ask, quietly, "Do you think this means something bigger? Like, do you think you're not who you thought you were?" That question could have set off panic. Instead, I learned to answer it with humility. "I don't know," I'd say. "But I know this, whatever it means, I want to stay honest. I want to keep being your partner. I want to keep being responsible." That was the integration phase for me, even though I didn't have that word for it at the time. Integration wasn't about reaching a final label. It was about weaving my inner truth into my life in a way that didn't rely on secrecy or self-contempt. It was about letting the exploration make me kinder, not just freer. Kinder to myself, kinder to Claire, kinder to other people who were carrying their own locked drawers. Eventually, Claire and I reached a kind of steady rhythm. Some weeks, the topic barely came up. Other weeks, it felt present and alive. The difference was that it no longer felt like a threat to our marriage. It felt like a dimension of it, a place where we practiced trust, communication, and respect. And the dynamic between us, her small ways of taking control, became something we understood rather than something that happened unconsciously. Claire still liked choosing outfits sometimes. I still sometimes liked letting her, because letting someone care for you can be a form of intimacy. But now it came with explicit consent and mutuality. I could say, "I want you to lead tonight," and she could say, "Only if you really mean that." I could also say, "Not tonight," and she could accept it without turning it into a test of courage. That shift mattered. It made the experience healthier. It made it sustainable. The biggest change, though, was internal. I stopped thinking of myself as someone with a secret defect. I started thinking of myself as someone with a broader emotional palette than I had been allowed to use. I realized that exploring femininity in expression didn't cancel my masculinity, and it didn't erase my responsibilities. It didn't make me less capable. It didn't make my love for my wife less real. If anything, it made me more honest, and honesty, real honesty, not performative confession, requires discipline. If you're listening to this and you recognize pieces of yourself in it, I want to say something carefully. You don't owe anyone a spectacle. You don't owe anyone a rushed conclusion. You don't owe anyone shame. But you do owe yourself and the people you love a commitment to truth and responsibility. Go slowly. Talk to someone safe. If you're in a relationship, remember that exploration isn't a solo journey when it affects two lives. Consent, communication, and compassion aren't optional. They are the foundation. I sometimes think back to that kid in the hallway mirror with a scarf around his neck, ripping it off at the sound of footsteps. I wish I could go back and tell him that the footsteps weren't the end of the world, that he wasn't wrong for feeling calm and softness, that he would one day sit at a kitchen table with the person he loves and speak the truth out loud. I can't change the past, but I can honor it by living more openly now, even if openly still means within the privacy of our home. Openness isn't always public. Sometimes it's simply internal, refusing to lie to yourself. And in the end, what I've learned is that identity exploration isn't about becoming someone else. It's about becoming more fully yourself, with fewer compartments and less fear. It's about learning that dignity isn't something you lose by being different, it's something you practice by being honest, thoughtful, and respectful. Thank you for watching and spending this time with me. If this story helped you understand yourself or others a little better, feel free to explore more on the channel.